the believers, he's writing to, of course, us as well as we're reading this, to overcome different barriers, overcome different difficulties, obstacles that may be, in kind of the way in the ministry, and overcome, the temptation to give up. Essentially, is kind of what he's mentioning here. And he has a desire. Right? Paul expressed previously in these verses a desire for the Thessalonian believers, his love for them, his care for them, and he wanted to see them physically, wanted to be there with them, right? But he was hindered from doing so because of the persecution. Satan was using persecutors, to keep him out of Thessalonica. And even in the midst of the opposition, in the midst of the problems, Paul knew that the ministry there in Thessalonica would continue to be successful because the believers that were there were pretty gutsy and we're continuing to keep the faith, and this is why, and he got this, of course, report from Timothy, and this is the reason, of course, again, for these letters, right? Paul's warning the believers to expect opposition, expect temptations to quit, expect failures to happen at times, but to continue to keep the faith and have, again, the quit-proof faith here that he's going to mention in these verses, all right? A couple things here. This is from the New York Times in 1936. Okay, back when it was a much more reputable source of information than it is today. 1936, New York Times. A rocket will never be able to leave the Earth's atmosphere. In 1943, the chairman of IBM says, I think there is a world market for maybe 4 or 5 computers. 1969. A scientist predicted that because of environmental problems, everybody will disappear in a cloud of blue steam in 20 years. In the 1970s, several scientists noted evidence of a great global cooling, which would lead to a new ice age in as little as 50 years. 1995 Newsweek article says that the truth is there will never be an online database that will replace your daily newspaper. 2007, the CEO of Microsoft, there's not a chance that the iPhone is going to gain any significant market share. No chance at all. Is it difficult to make predictions? That's 6, 7 instances there where definitely the case. The people who made these predictions, right, and just predictions in general, read these now, it seems pretty silly, right? Seems pretty way out there, way off about now and what is going on now compared to the past, right? It's difficult to predict things in the future. Why were those predictions? Why are they so off?
They're man.
Okay, because they're man. What other reason? Why are those predictions kind of so far off?
They didn't have the evidence.
Right, yeah, so they had a very limited perspective of things, right? Didn't have the ability to see the future. Didn't have an ability to sit up in an algorithm to maybe predict even potentially what could happen. The perspective for them was very limited. If you had to make a prediction for the future today, what would it be? All right, then we could sit here and probably do this all day long, right? On different things that could happen, may happen, that are said going to happen, that they said was going to happen and didn't happen, they said that wasn't going to happen and did happen, right? So on and so forth, right? The future is impossible to predict with absolute certainty, unless, of course, God is involved. Paul is going to make some accurate predictions here, but his predictions were under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. So while he was writing to the believers there in Thessalonica, he warned them to expect persecutions. Right? He knew that it was going to happen. He warned them to expect that temptations as believers are going to be there. And of course, Paul's predictions come true for the Thessalonians. Same thing for us. Like we too as believers are going to face temptations, persecution, and kind of be prepared for these things. Okay? Driving down the road, heading to a destination, trying to get maybe on vacation or to see somebody or get to, I don't know, whatever the case may be. It's always really frustrating when you're running maybe even a little bit behind and you roll up on a road that says detour ahead, right? And that you have to take some route off the interstate or off the 4-lane or some route that is eventually probably going to take you longer to get there than the intended route that you were going on. You got to take those routes when the detour is there. It seems like in the last 6 months in Wise, there's just been constant stuff. There's just like working on 4-lane, paving and road. It's just been constant, it seems like. And trying to get somewhere with any type of time, staring at a roadblock, sitting in traffic, maybe not being able to continue on the same route you were going on. All of those things kind of can be irritating and can be altering of what you are planning to try to do, right? What goes through your mind when you come to a road closed sign? Like an actual road, you're driving and road closed. What comes to your mind?
Also
Yeah, exactly, right? This is going to, and when we travel places, like I get a itinerary in my head that I don't tell Haley and the girls about. And I think that, like, hey, we need to leave at this time. But I don't tell anybody we're leaving at this time. But then we get that time we've not left yet, I get, like, irritated. But they didn't know that I'd planned on it. It's just like it. So, and then we roll, and then maybe we get left on time. We kind of stop at a roadblock. And Haley's been in the car with me a lot. Like, I get frustrated quick, especially when I'm trying to get somewhere. And nothing I can do. There's nothing we can do about it, right? Those things happen, right? Roadblocks, detours, traffic stops, right? Traffic jams. Those things. There's not a lot we can do. They're going to happen. Those things are things that we cannot control. Sometimes taking those detours actually works out for the better, right? Especially when you're traveling down 81 sometimes, right? And it's just jam-packed full of 18-wheelers. You can get over on one of those side roads, right? And you can go, not as fast, but you just kind of see the car stacked up as you're passing by. Detour's a good thing in that case, right? We should not be surprised, right, when we face these detours, especially when serving God. And that's the temptation of being concerned about those detours, just kind of allowing those detours to alter the ultimate goal is kind of what Paul is going to be mentioning here. Right. So first, a couple things here is we need to expect barriers while we're serving God. Right. Verses 17 and 18 of chapter 2 of 1 Thessalonians. Let's read those, and we'll kind of get into some more of this. But we, brethren, being taken from you for a short time, in presence, not in heart, endeavored the more abundantly to see your face with great desire. Wherefore, we would have come unto you, even I, Paul, once again, but Satan hindered us, right? So in his first letter here to the Thessalonians, Paul, first couple chapters, has recalled the success of this ministry, right? He's mentioned numerous times how successful God has, or how successfully God has used the Thessalonian Christians there. And, he's mentioned last week, like, the pure motives of his team, the behavior among among his team, amongst the Thessalonians, the excellent response from the Thessalonians as well. And he backed up in his letter to describe the struggle that he had for not being able to physically be there with them. He had a great desire to do that, and he just simply couldn't. He wanted to show the Thessalonians his deep concern and his really deep interest for their continual spiritual growth. There were barriers, yes, that were there, that were keeping him from being there, but he still wanted to express that while they're not physically, he still had great concern and great love for them, and he desired to see them continue to grow spiritually. Now, Acts 17, we first started this study, we went through Acts 17, and specifically verses like 5 through 12 or so. That was when Paul, the rioters, the Jewish rioters there, forced Paul out of the city. And even though he wasn't there, his heart remained with them. And so he had these physical people-placed barriers that were there. The local Jews that didn't like him, that had this barrier set up so that he couldn't be there. And he longed to see their faces. So what was Paul there in verse 17, right? Being taken, not there in presence, for a short time in presence, not in heart, endeavored the more abundantly to see your face with great desire. What does it mean? What does Paul mean here when he says that his heart was with the Thessalonians? What does it mean when, you're not there physically, but what is he trying to imply to them when he says that his heart is there with the Thessalonians? What? He hadn't forgotten about him, yes. But if you have, what else is that? What does that mean? You love him, and he's probably doing what for them continually? He's probably constantly praying for them, right? He has a concern for them, so he is they're constantly in his thoughts, constantly in his prayers. He had a concern for them, and you have, when you're constantly thinking about somebody, right, and praying for their needs and worrying about them, right, and wanting to make sure they're okay, that shows a great love and shows a great concern. And he didn't want the Thessalonians to think that he had abandoned them, right? God saved the Thessalonians, absolutely. But God used Paul as that physical person that was there. They had a great, intimate, personal relationship with Paul. And Paul felt that same love for them, right? We talked about it a couple weeks ago, or last week a little bit, that Paul loved them like a mother loves a newborn child, right? He had this deep concern and deep care for them, and he considered himself their spiritual father, right? Over in verse 11 of chapter 2, he even mentions that, right? As ye know how we exhorted and comforted and charged every one of you as a father doth his children. So he had this great love and great concern, and he described his separation from them as being torn away from his child. That's the description that he is using. The Jews that were in Thessalonica, again, had the barriers up, wouldn't let Paul return to see them. At least not so soon after he had turned the Thessalonians' world upside down, right? And we talked about that, what that meant last couple weeks. The Jews that were there that hadn't converted, they hated Paul. And they had no desire to see him, and had told Paul, hey, you show back up, we're going to kill you. Like, you show back up in Thessalonica, we're going to have you killed. We don't want you here. Paul, though, no stranger to human opposition, right? This happened to him tons and tons of times. Pretty much anywhere he went, Paul faced some type of human opposition, throwing him in jail, bringing him before the people in charge, whatever they're, all the different things that happened. In his first missionary journey to Antioch, very first time he was out, he was stoned, right, and left for dead, just laying there. But here, the case in Thessalonica is different than Antioch. On his first journey, eventually, Acts 14 tells us that Paul was eventually able to get back to Antioch. That wasn't the case here in Thessalonica. They didn't. He couldn't simply go back. Go ahead, Chad. Click again. Hoping a question pops up there. Oh, yeah. Go ahead. One more question, I think. All right, so what is the motivation? Go back to that one, please. That question, please. What is the motivation for unbelievers to so strongly oppose those who serve God well? What motivates unbelievers to strongly oppose God, to strongly oppose the people who are serving God? What does that mean? Why were they so willing to kill Paul for what he was doing? Jealousy, sure. Conviction. Yeah, that's a good one, right? Those Jewish people were living according to their sinful nature, right? They were living according to their sinful nature. They are essentially serving Satan, right? And we know God and Satan don't mix. They can't, right? And Satan, for the entirety of human history, has always tried to do what? Thwart the plan of God, right? Doesn't want to be successful. Because ultimately, what happens to Satan in the plan of God? Right? He loses, right? He has to spend eternity there in hell. It doesn't work out for him. In Satan's mind, the only way to make sure that outcome doesn't happen is to figure out a way to thwart the plan along the way. And this is exactly what he is, right? So he's using these this Jewish opposition to discourage the believers. They're serving Satan, the little g god of the world, whose job is to discourage these believers. Faithful believers disrupt unbelievers' lives. And they do so by exposing their sin, right? Faithful believers disrupt unbelievers' lives by exposing their sin. And do any of us like to have our sin exposed? No, absolutely not, right? They don't like that in any way because that leads to conviction, right? So unbelievers are always going to try and create barriers to keep believers from ministering effectively to certain people or in certain places. Satan works in and through them, as Paul goes on to note in verse 18. Go ahead, Jay, bring that one up. Wherefore, verse 18, we would have come again unto you, even I, Paul, once and again, but Satan hindered us, right? Paul uses the phrase there, hindered. Hindering means, not, causing a detour, right? Causing a problem in some way. Satan himself was trying to hinder Paul's return and was successful in hindering Paul's return to Thessalonica. The word hindering specifically describes destroying bridges and cutting into roads to make them impossible to use. Right? That's the word he used there. That would have been common in actions of war, right? Blow up the bridges, can't get the troops across, right? Mess up the roadways, can't get them supplied, can't get them moved around. All these different ways that can kind of cause transportation to be ineffective and not work anymore. That's what that's the phrasing that he uses there in hindered. We've all seen recently, I'm sure, videos or pictures of the wars that are going on in Ukraine and in Palestine, in Gaza, and then what we did to the Iranians a couple weeks ago. You see the pictures after the aftermath of that. The whole terrain is altered, right? The bridges are gone, the roads are gone. There's literally nothing left. Paul didn't give the specific details of the barriers that he was facing, but it's pretty possible that he's referring to specifically the same Jews who had persecuted he and Silas in Thessalonica. When the Jews heard that Paul and Silas fled to Berea and were preaching there as well, they actually went to stir up more trouble. Let's go to Acts chapter 7. Let's see this actually happening here. Go to Acts 17. Instead of just talking about this, let's actually read here what was going on. Start there. Let's go to verse 13 first of Acts 17. But when the Jews of Thessalonica had knowledge that the word of God, which they preached of Paul at Berea, they came thither also. So they kicked them out of Thessalonica, and they left and went to Berea, started doing the same thing, right? And they heard that and didn't like that either. And we see that they stirred up the people in verse 13 in Berea as well. And then immediately, verse 14, the brethren sent away Paul to go, as it were, to the sea. But Silas and Timotheus abode there still. Verse 15, and they that conducted Paul brought him unto Athens, and receiving a commandment unto Silas and Timotheus for to come to him with all speed, they departed. Right? So they kicked him out of Thessalonica. They went down and started doing the same thing in Berea. And we see Paul had to flee again. And this time he had to flee and head out to Athens. Verse 16. Now while Paul waited for them at Athens, so he went to Athens, his spirit was stirred in him when he saw the city wholly given to idolatry. And we know that Paul was there in Athens, and starts doing what? He starts preaching again, right? Starts doing the same thing. So whatever barrier Satan was using, obviously here had worked through the circumstances to keep the missionaries out of Thessalonica. Satan is still bombing bridges, still causing these things today, right? He's still causing these barriers today. Constantly seeking to hinder believers from growing spiritually, from sharing the gospel, and from ministering to fellow believers. Like I said it up here a lot. Satan can care less about the unsaved. Right? He doesn't care about the unsaved because he's got them, right? He doesn't focus his time there. It's more effective for him to thwart the plan of God by manipulating or trying to destroy the testimonies of believers. Because as Christians, our job is to do what? Ultimate job is to do what? Spread the gospel, right? That's what we're supposed to be doing. The way that we live, the way we talk, all the different things we're supposed to be doing to spread the gospel. And if he can thwart Christians from spreading the gospel, then the message doesn't get shared and people remain unsaved. Okay? So Satan's continuing today to discourage and to defeat us, wanting us to give up our attempts, to give up our work, trying to help other believers grow in the Lord. Go ahead, Chad, this question should pop up. What are some of the ways today that, there should be a question comes, that Satan is bombing out bridges to hinder missionaries or to hinder the gospel message today? What are some ways today that Satan is trying to hinder these messages today? What are the things that's happening? What's happening today to missionaries or to Christians or to people that are trying to spread the gospel? Persecution, right? What else? There's other things going on too, not just persecution. That is one of them. What other things are happening too? What? Sure, yep, absolutely. What else?
The appeal of prosperity or an easier life.
Okay. What's he doing in the church?
Perversion of the gospel.
Okay, and that causes what?
Division.
Specifically for missionaries. What does that cause? If perversion in the church is happening, confusion in the church is happening, how does that specifically hurt missionaries? What? The funding, right? It hurts the funding of those missionaries to go out and to spread the gospel, right? There is a great lack. There's been a great decline. That's a better word. There's been a great decline of support of churches for mission work. Okay? How many churches that you know that people attend that maybe are they're good people, good churches, right? Maybe they are. How many of them though have a really focused, dedicated desire to make sure that money and funds are being spent on mission work? Right? How many churches do we know just in our little area right here, right, that have a dedicated fund, dedicated, can't think of the word, the word's not coming to me, dedicated desire to spend money towards mission work? How many churches do you know support missionaries in our little area? Like actually actively supporting missionaries? I'll tell you, it's not very many that have missionaries that are supported through the church. We do here, right? We absolutely do here, and there are some that do, but there is not a lot of that going on, right? And definitely not the same amount that was happening even 15, 20 years ago. At the beginning of 25 years, the beginning of 2000, it's hard to believe, right? But it's been 25 years now. How many churches now that are spending less in our area on missions than there were 20 years ago? It's a lot, right? It's a lot, right? That is a coordinated attack by Satan on the gospel message, right? Not only many people coming to church, not only people giving to missionaries, right? At one time, America was the greatest sender of missionaries around the world. I think if you look at the stats today, there's a lot of missionaries that are coming from other countries to America. Right, and it's the tide has changed. Right, he has used these coordinated attacks on the destruction of the missionaries, violent threats to believers. Right, countries being closed off completely. Right, to the gospel message, being closed off completely to having Christian missionaries in their area. All those things are circumstances in which Satan is trying to slow the progress of the people working for God and slow the progress of the gospel message in church. No, but those have been successful. Yes. Can Satan fully stop it? No, he can't. Right? He absolutely cannot. Faithful servants of God, whether it be in a mission field, whether it be in a local body, will always find success. Did Paul find ways around Satan's obstructions? Yes, we've seen that. What did he do? Just for Thessalonians Christians specifically, how did Paul find a workaround? He wrote a letter. He sent Timothy, right? Timothy, the Jews there didn't know him as well, so he sent Timothy to check on him. Timothy reported back, and he wrote a letter and got a letter to him, right? So he found a workaround to the obstruction. God's will always find a way, as long as people are faithful in carrying out the work, right? There will always be a way to minister to the new believers, to minister to people, right? There's a picture, I didn't know it was up there. There's a picture there of one of the bomb bridges there in Ukraine. This is a specific picture that the Russians were running their tanks through at the beginning of the war, back whenever it started. I don't remember exactly when it was. They were using this bridge to run some of the tanks in, or out of Russia into the area there in Ukraine, and they blew up this bridge so they couldn't get those tanks in. There's just a picture of that. I didn't realize it was on the thing. All right, go ahead, Chad. Go and bring up to the second point there. Now, starting in verse 19, Paul tells them to expect success while serving God. Right? Expect success while serving God. So go back over to verse 19 of 1 Thessalonians. Let's read verses 19 and 20 there, the second chapter. For what is our hope or joy or crown of rejoicing? Are not even ye in the presence of our Lord Jesus Christ that is coming? Verse 20. For ye are our glory and joy. So despite the opposition, Paul knew that he would ultimately find success in the ministry that he has started there in Thessalonica. We know that in Timothy's report, in the first part of 1 Thessalonians, Paul was right about finding success. He expected success. Timothy showed up, saw the success, reported back. So he knew that was going to happen. The Thessalonians were growing in the Lord, and they were living in anticipation of his return. Right? That was over in the first chapter there that Paul says that. When Paul finished his earthly ministry, he said his crown of rejoicing would be believers like those that were in Thessalonica. With his mention of crowns, the Thessalonians would have pictured one of the Greek athletes winning, the laurel crowns that they wore when they had their athletic events. I think I've got a picture of that. Should I bring that up? And so that's something they would. So that's what the crowns that you've seen these pictures. The original Olympics, right? They're running the marathons and doing all that stuff. They would put these laurel crowns on them. So that's the thing that he is mentioning there. When he's talking about that, that would have given them like an idea of what he was talking about. And just as the victorious Greeks athletes rejoiced and were celebrated for their athletic accomplishments, Paul knew also that he would rejoice for the Thessalonians who had come to Christ through his ministry, and they would be his crowns. Right? They would symbolize his spiritual victory in a very, very difficult city there in Thessalonica. But Paul is also, of course, going to receive actual crowns for his service to the Lord. Christ is going to give actual physical crowns to faithful believers at the judgment seat of Christ in heaven immediately following the rapture. Go to 2 Corinthians with me, please, chapter 5. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, look at verse number 10. So let's start in verse number 8, or 9, Wherefore we labor, that whether present or absent, we may be accepted of him. Verse 10, For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that everyone may receive the things done in his body, according to that he hath done, whether it be good or bad. Paul is going to be glad, joyful, rejoicing, to have the physical crowns, because they will be given to him, and show that that they will give him the opportunity to glorify God for ministering through him to reach the lost. Paul refers to these crowns a couple times, okay, in other places, and he assures the believers who faithfully finish their race that they're going to receive crowns that will last forever. Stay there in 1 Corinthians and look at chapter 9. Or go to 1 Corinthians, chapter 9. Verse 24 and 25, Know ye not that which run in a race, run all, but one receiveth the prize. So run that ye may obtain. And every man that striveth for the mastery is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, but we as Christians do it to obtain an incorruptible. But we an incorruptible, right? So that's the mentioning there of these crowns that are going to last forever for the work that is done for God. Like Paul, we also as Christians, if we continue to maintain the faith, right, have a quit-proof faith, continue to do the work, continue to show up, regardless of the obstacles, regardless of the problems, regardless of what Satan throws at us, any types of bombs and bridges that come around us, it doesn't matter, right? We can be joyful and remain faithful in the fact that God, one, wants us to do these things, requires us to do these things, but will then reward us with these incorruptible crowns that we can use to glorify God in the work that we are doing. Why do you think God tells us he will reward us with crowns for persevering in our service for him? Go ahead, Jack. Click the next one. Why do you think that he will? Why do you think God is telling us that he will reward us with these crowns for preserving our service in him? What's the reason for the crowns?
Reward, encouragement.
Right. Yeah. So what's the maybe a better question is, what's the reason for the reward?
Because our dedication to God.
All right, so because of our dedication for God. So, but why? What's this concept of God giving us these crowns? Why did God put this in place? For a job well done. Okay, we're all the way around the bush. We're not in the bush yet, though.
Recognition of doing it His way.
Recognition of doing it His way. All right. Direct connection of present life work and reward of that work, right? There is a direct connection between our present life and the experience that we're going to have in eternity, all right? God promises us the crowns if we do the work here, so that gives us I don't want to say a bridge, but this connection to show that He has expectations about how we use our time here on earth. Heavenly crowns changes our focus off of the earthly things and puts our focus on the heavenly things. Right? We become, when we can get this eternal outlook, we become less concerned with the value of success here on earth and more concerned in the value of success in heaven, because those crowns aren't going to go away. The success that we get here, we know eventually is going to be like wood, hay, and stubble, right? Those crowns are not going to be that way. They're going to last for eternity. They're going to be there permanently. Right? There's, what's the sense of spending our time on something that is eventually going to go away anyways, right? It changes how we look at the small book of time that we have here on earth. It gives us that direct connection to focus on things that have only eternal value. Paul, that's what he's mentioned. Paul got there, right? He gets it, right? And we understand it, right? But it's a bit of a difficult thing at times for us as Christians to, especially when these roadblocks and things happen, to not be focused on the here and now. It's hard sometimes, right? It gets easy to be so concerned with what's going on in our little bubble of things that we forget to focus on what actually has eternal value. Paul is reminding the Thessalonians, yes, stuff stinks sometimes. It is hard, right? But the hard stuff is worth it because the reward lasts forever. And God requires and expects us to be focused on the things that will last permanently, not be focused on the things that are not permanent. Even when it really stinks. Right? He still wants us to remain faithful, and we can expect this future glory and have an expectation of success while we're serving God. And even when it's difficult, we can ultimately see success because God is going to allow the success to come through. Even during the stinky stuff. Even during the stuff that's really, really hard. Okay? Starting in chapter 3, go ahead, Jim, bring it up. I'm going to finish here. But starting in chapter 3, he's going to then get into expecting growth towards maturity, and that's what we're going to look at next week. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time. We can look into your word, for the lessons here that Paul has given these Thessalonian Christians, and how to have a end-proof faith, and how it's important for us, Lord, to continue the work in which we're doing faithfully to you, because the reward is far greater than the distress that comes with it at times. I'll pray for Pastor Roberts that comes in next little bit too, that we're attentive to your word this morning, listening, Lord, and being focused in on the lessons you have for us here, I pray. Amen.